Hello and welcome back to Women of Nottingham, the Majority podcast. I'm Catherine and this week we're speaking to Claire Bale, or more commonly known on the internet as the author of Ooh, That's A Bit Racey, the blog and Instagram account chatting about race and all of the different books surrounding it. We talk a little bit about reading and the arts in lockdown and why the conversation about race needs to keep happening and the way that she's involving books in that conversation. Really, really powerful and really good for some book recommendations. So if you're twiddling your thumbs a bit before we all open up, hopefully in June, then we've got some books for you to read. Here's Claire.
I'm Claire Bale and I'm the author of the blog Oh, That's A Bit Racey. And the blog is designed to try and get people to talk about race and to keep talking about race and to understand it and engage with it and have conversations that help us all learn together on that important subject.
And I came across your blog relatively recently, but how long have you been running it and what made you start it in the first place? Why did you think it was needed?
I started the blog about 6 months ago, so not that long ago really, but I really felt I needed a way to document a journey that I was on personally. So I was really learning a lot about racial equality and was on a journey of personal anti-racism myself. And part of that involved a lot of reading and a lot of talking to people, and my brain was absolutely spinning with all this information, some of which was really hard to hear, a lot of which was inspiring me with lots of ideas and what we could do as a society to connect with each other better. So I started writing just a way of processing my own thoughts, and because I really felt that getting people talking was key to progress, I thought a way to hopefully do that is to put my points of view out there and invite people in to comment and discuss and challenge and debate. So that's what got me to actually start publishing it for people to read and hopefully engage with in that way.
And the way I actually came across the blog is you started a Instagram, or I suppose the way that it's being phrased is a bookstagram, which I hadn't heard use that word before. What made you then choose to do that? You mentioned reading and reading being a really important part of your anti-racism journey. Why do you think reading is important and why should we encourage people to do it more?
Reading is important to me and always has been. It's one of my real joys ever since I was a child. So it's always been part of my life, and I've always followed book accounts on Instagram, bookstagrams as you call them. And it felt like quite a light-hearted way to open up people's eyes to subjects that can be very difficult to learn about or talk about, because it's important to learn about others' experiences, and one way of doing that is through reading. And also, if there's a subject that's quite difficult to talk about, it's perhaps easier to talk about it if you're talking about a book or a character in a book or a story. So I felt like that had a real possibility to support the blog, and it was a way of sharing everything that I was reading, which really, really increased through lockdown. That's one of lockdown's blessings. I was able to dedicate a lot more time to my reading. And I made a vow to read only Black authors for a month, which soon extended to a year. And it just felt like actually starting my own bookstagram account to share that was a really good way of just reaching people who, by nature of being interested in books, are going to be interested in learning and others' points of view as well. And it's been really, really fun to do.
And you said about the importance of connecting and having those conversations. How have you found the reception to your blog, to your accounts, to the conversations that you've been having?
It's been really lovely, actually. I'm really encouraging, and I've been really humbled by the amount of people who've supported me on my blog. I felt really self-conscious about it. Although I'm used to writing, I'm not used to writing about my own personal experiences or feelings. But, I started sharing it with a few close friends, family members, and everyone was really, you've got to put this out there, people need to read this. And it's built up a really lovely sense of community. And I feel it's just connected me to people I know and love more deeply, relatives who have since passed away. I feel like I understand them more now. And it's brought loads of new people into my circle, people I've spoken to and met and conversed with and learnt from and shared opportunities with. And it's been a really great way of connecting with society. Especially my local community here in Nottingham. So I really feel that I'm able to give something back to the community, which might sound a bit cheesy, but being part of Nottingham, I've learned so much more about it. We've got a huge population of mixed race people, for example, of which I'm one, which I didn't really know because it can sometimes feel a little bit lonely to be mixed race. So I've worked with the Colour of Love organisation, which is a voluntary organisation all about documenting mixed race relationships in Nottingham. I've connected to the Nottingham City of Literature as a new trustee for equality and diversity. So I've met loads of people who are passionate about the arts and about creativity in that sphere as well. And it's just connected me to lots of people in lots of really new and exciting ways.
And you mentioned there about the Nottingham City of Literature. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I have heard that this is happening, but I don't really know that much about it, and I think some people listening may not have heard about it. What does that mean, and what as a trustee will you be doing for it?
Yeah, sure. The Nottingham City of Literature is a UNESCO accreditation, and it's a charity run solely on funding, and the aim of it is to build a better world with words. So it's all about encouraging people to read and write and listen to words. It's got a strong focus on young people, enabling young people to grow their literacy, but people of all ages to really improve their education, their understanding, think about how the arts can really support people through well-being, through times of challenge, through their careers and their options in the world. So it's quite a challenging time at the moment. Like with a lot of charities, we are losing quite a lot of public funding just because of the nature of the world's finances. But we're really finding exciting, innovative ways to reach people and inspire them to use literature to self-improve and to improve the world around them. So it's a great company to be part of.
And to pick up on sort of the difficult time that people are facing, and you were saying about the importance of the arts, and I think something that lockdown has taught me, and I think a lot of other people, is that the arts are so important. The things that got us through were reading books, as you said, or watching our favourite TV shows, and the things we're missing are things like going to the theatre or going to the cinema or whatever it might be. Why do you think arts are important, particularly as public funding keeps getting cut about it?
The arts, I think, are hugely important in lots of different ways. I think they bring a huge amount of pleasure to people, straightforward entertainment and escapism. And to me, it feels like it's in a way that's a little bit richer than potentially watching a television programme or vegging out at home. There's something about the arts when you think about literature or poetry or live performances or music that just seems to be quite healing as well as quite entertaining. I think it's got a really important role in people understanding the world around them. And really, really importantly, and this is something I've learned a lot about, it's also a really good vehicle for representation. So people are able to see people with different experiences or read or listen to different cultures in the art that they produce. And that helps inspire them and also give them their own confidence if they're in a marginalised group, for example. And it also gives them the opportunity to just learn from what they're doing. So if you're watching a play about a flawed hero, you learn that you can still empathise with a character even though they might make the most terrible mistakes. So it gives you that resilience and that perspective on life, and it's really something that connects us. I personally have a lot of passion for the arts. I dance as a hobby. I go to the theatre a lot. It's something I do a lot with my family, and I really miss that. There's really something special about going and seeing anything live. So I think society is definitely the poorer for the lack of it that we've got at the moment, and I can't wait for those opportunities to come back.
Interestingly, I was going to ask you about representation, because representation can come about in a lot of ways, and the way we're talking about it is sort of representation on screen or representation in art and generally, in the case that you're looking at a lot in books. And I think we've got to the point where we've accepted that representation is incredibly important. I think a lot of people say, why is that important? Is that enough? What's the case around it? Why do you think reading about somebody that looks like you, or someone you can identify with, or even somebody that you can sort of parallel with their story, why is that important for people?
Representation's an important one, and I've learned a lot about this And there are elements of it that are a little bit controversial, actually. So representation in its truest sense is quite deep. It's meaningful. It truly represents an experience of someone, even if that is just one individual person. There's actually a fine line between representation and tokenism. So representation isn't an advert full of beautiful women and one of them happens to be dark-skinned. Representation is actually about bringing that experience to life and understanding the point of view of the different people who will be engaging with that medium. So I think books are a really good way to represent individuals, because by the nature of the fact of reading about that character or even being in that character's shoes, hearing their thoughts, taking part in their dialogue, for example, you are empathising and putting yourself in that person's shoes. If it's representation where it's somebody who has a similar experience to you, somebody from a specific part of the world, or somebody from a particular community that you feel connected with, it normalises it, firstly. So if you're somebody who feels quite alone in the world around them, it makes you feel like, actually, there are people like me in the world and they can do these things and be these things and have these experiences. And that's incredibly important for self-esteem, especially for young people. The danger is if we just have a tokenistic gesture without any real meaning or understanding behind it, it can almost make people feel that racism isn't an issue. So, I've had conversations with people who say, well, we can't be that racist because there are lots of black people on my TV screens and every clothing company you see now has a mixed race woman with curly hair in it. So curly hair must be acceptable in society. And we need to be really careful. Representation is much more important than that. It's about really engaging with individuals and understanding their points of view and putting those out there in the world for other people to learn from as well.
I know particularly recently, a lot of people have said, yeah, we definitely need to talk about race, but it makes me really, really uncomfortable. How do you tackle that and how do you get people to talk about it? Because I suppose that's what you've done, right? You've just started talking about it and saying, hey, it's important. We should talk about it. And if you feel uncomfortable, that's kind of part of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. People are so uncomfortable talking about race. And I've learned absolutely loads in the last 9 months or so since I've been purposefully engaging with this. And I look back on some of the conversations I've had in the past and I cringe and I think, oh God, I handled that badly because something triggered me, or I thought somebody was more open-minded than they actually were and I got cross, or there are lots of things that I've learned along the way, and discomfort is massive. And I do feel there are a huge amount of well-intentioned people out there. And if you label them something, or if you indicate they might be a racist or xenophobic or homophobic or sexist, it is like a red rag to a bull, and they are so mortified and offended that it either makes them angry or it makes them completely turn off from the conversation altogether, and then they've not learnt anything. So I think it's really, really important, and it can be really challenging sometimes because things do trigger you, but to be open-minded and kind and calm and to let people have the conversation. So I always try and say in my blogs, no question is a silly question. Within the realms of being reasonable, you won't offend me. You can always tell whether somebody is doing something from the right intention or not. And then I catch myself, I'll catch myself in a conversation and then getting really angry and under my breath, calling them a rude name because I find it so ignorant. I need to catch myself and think, no, I've got to stay true to what I stand for here. This is all about us learning together and we have to converse. And I have to role model that and have conversations that I'm not comfortable with so that other people can feel they can do the same. Because if we can't talk about it, we won't progress. And actually, people are really frightened about being caught out by saying something that might be perceived as ignorant or offensive. And I think it's quite a British culture as well. We would hate to ever offend anybody, so we'd rather not say anything at all than actually put ourselves out there and learn something.
I think that's a really great way of looking at it. And I suppose you're kind of then sacrificing some of perhaps your mental health, because I imagine some of those conversations are filled with whatever it might be, microaggressions or just some ignorance. And the fact that you're saying, I'm going to put that aside if it's well-intentioned to sort of further the conversation, that's got to be difficult for you sometimes.
It is actually, yeah, that is true. It is challenging. And actually, every piece of training I attend or every challenging conversation I have with the purpose of educating people, or opening up the conversation, is difficult personally. And it is sometimes say, God, I go to a training session. It's not just the training I'm learning. It's like therapy, because I'm thinking about my ancestors, my family, my daughter, myself. And it's really hard, and it can be very, very emotional. But I would definitely describe myself as hugely privileged in my life and my experience. So, my discomfort is absolutely nothing compared to what many, many people have gone through. So to me, it's worth it. It's all part of the process.
And something you mentioned earlier was that you'd connected with a lot of people in Nottingham in a way that you hadn't done previously. And I thought it was really interesting because obviously you're doing it online, you can reach pretty much anybody anywhere in the world. How have you found your sort of Nottingham group, your Nottingham people? And what do you think is special about the city? Because I do think it has a really, really special essence.
I think that's true. I think Nottingham has got quite a unique and very special essence. I remember when I moved out of London, where I'd lived for 10 years, back up to Nottingham, I remember my boss, where I worked at a big bank at the time, saying, "Oh God, will you be all right in Nottingham?" And I was living in Hackney at the time. But Nottingham was perceived to be this really dangerous place where people got shot, and I found it quite amusing because I grew up in Nottingham and always had a great time. And of course, it's a really diverse population in all ways, and there are underprivileged areas and highly privileged areas, and I've always lived probably somewhere in between the two. But I think the way I've been working has been through conversation, and that started with myself and my family, and then that's grown to my place of work, which is Nottingham Girls High School. It's then grown into people I've met through those networks, and it's just been quite organic, really. I follow a lot of Nottingham organisations on social media, so I've seen opportunities come up there. So the Nottingham City of Literature, for example, was something I saw advertised. They were looking for a trustee for equality and diversity. So the opportunities have just been there, and they're the ones that I find myself feeling most passionate about. So they're the ones I've gone for. And yes, you're right, it's really strange to be doing all of this online, but I honestly have best friends now in my life who I've never met in person. It's crazy. But we've really, really connected, and we've connected over shared experiences and through a passion for learning and supporting each other. And a lot of that does actually come through book recommendations. We keep coming back to books. But there are individuals who I speak to, a couple of times every week. And then I put the phone down. I was like, "God, I've never actually met. I wonder how tall that person is. I've never actually seen him in person." So yeah, it's quite a funny time. But one of these days we'll have a really, really big dinner party and all get together.
I've definitely found that with meeting people online, and you meet them in person, you go, "Oh my goodness, you're tiny." I don't know what I pictured you as, but you're so much smaller.
You only ever see the top half of them on the screen.
And obviously this blog, your work with the City of Literature, all of this is in addition to your sort of full-time main job, if you will. Has that been hard to juggle? How have you managed to, because obviously this has grown, how have you managed with that?
Juggling the day job and this has been really, really surprisingly easy, actually. It hasn't felt like an effort. My day job is more than just a day job to me anyway. It's something I am really passionate about. I really believe in education. I really believe in female education and the particular school I work at. So that is a labour of love. It doesn't just pay the bills. And I read anyway when I'm not at work. So that is just natural. It's just taken more of a focused bibliography, I suppose. And the blogging just kind of happens. I mean, we're in lockdown, so I'm not going on holiday or out for dinner or out to parties. This has actually been a really lovely way to feel like I'm using my time purposefully, although I didn't set out to do it for that specific reason. And I'm very fortunate that my day job and my anti-racism work intersects. So the school that I work at is a real believer in working on diversity and inclusion with the girls at the school. So we are always learning together. We're part of a network of 25 schools, the Girls' Day School Trust, and we are all very committed to working in this space. I'm on the steering group for that, for the whole of the organisation. So actually, a lot of the conversations I have feed into each other in that respect. And it's just felt like a very natural extension of what I do, to be honest. And I'm getting a lot of support from my colleagues who are also my friends. So that's been really great.
That's really brilliant to hear. And I'd be interested to know, do you find that the conversations that you have with students perhaps are sometimes more receptive and more perhaps open-minded or different to conversations you're perhaps having with then peers and adults? Or is it a very similar conversation? I'd be intrigued.
It's been really interesting, actually. When I talk to young people, I am really, really encouraged by the nature of them in wanting to improve the world around them. So, one of the most common questions I get from young people when we ask kind of what they want to learn about when it comes to diversity and inclusion is, how can I be a better ally? White people will be asking how they can be a better ally to people from ethnic minority groups. Straight people will be asking about how they can be better allies for the LGBTQ plus community. It's so inspiring that people really want to improve diversity, and young people aren't afraid to put themselves into that and actually take a stake in it and not just think it's somebody else's problem. They are willing to do the work, to do the research, to read about it, to ask the questions, to do the learning. They're really passionate about it, and I just find that incredible and really inspiring. I think that they're more comfortable with taking themselves out of their comfort zone.
Fingers crossed we're heading in the right direction then.
Yes, I think so.
And I'm going to put you on the spot now because we have circled around book recommendations, and mainly asking for myself, but also for people that are listening. What are the sort of 2 or 3 books that you've read and written reviews of that you've gone, everyone needs to read this. This is incredibly important, whether it's race related or whether it's just a book that actually, if people read this, they're probably going to become a bit kinder, or anything along those lines?
Okay, right, that is a lovely question. The first one has to be Me and White Supremacy. Now, this is a tough book for people to read, and I have my greatest friend in the world is reading it very slowly because it makes her cry every time she picks it up. It's a book that is actually aimed at white people. It's non-fiction, and it faces into some very tough questions about how can you be a good ancestor. That's what it says at the start of the book, and it's the most powerful call to action I think I've ever read, whatever your background. And it deliberately provokes people to think about their own experiences, their own unconscious bias, their experiences compared to others. And it's actually written as a workshop. It's written as a workbook, I should say. So it asks questions, and it says you have to write down the answer to these questions. And then you flip over the page. It says, if you just flipped over the page because you can't be bothered to write down the answers to these questions, that's an example of your white privilege. So it's really provocative, but it's absolutely fantastic. As a person of colour, when I read it, I found it really educational and comforting because I thought, oh, there's a word for that feeling that I get when, take for example, tone policing. I'd never heard of that before. Oh, when somebody shuts me down because I'm being too aggressive in saying what I'm saying, that's not because I'm too aggressive. That's because they're not comfortable with the passion that I've got and they're trying to police my tone of voice. That's just one example. There are theories, there's research that Layla Saad has done that actually documents and proves that these are real evidential examples of systemic racism. So that is definitely number 1. Oh, I've got so many book recommendations. This is quite tough. I would say anything by Bernardine Evaristo. The reason I really, really like her, not only are her books absolutely brilliant reads, you can't put them down, I really like her because all of her stories have intersectionality interwoven into them. So race is almost always, I would suggest, a particular point of view, but also she will touch on neurodiversity, LGBTQ plus diversity, age, gender, and her books are written in such a way that you learn about lots of different aspects of society. They're multi-dimensional, but written in a way that is really, really entertaining and gripping and full of warmth. and hope, even when it's challenging situations. So I would say Mr. Lover Man or Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo are also really important. Right, let me turn around and look at my bookshelf, which is behind me. What am I going to choose for my third one?
Good to know you're not one of these that's gone out and bought books during lockdown to make their Zoom background look more interesting.
Well, you can't see me, but I have actually got books all the way behind me, but I promise I'm not just doing it for effect.
Imagine this is your whole outing of the blog.
It's just a big Zoom background. I am going to pick my current read, actually, which is called Don't Touch My Hair. And it's taken me a little while to get through this, even though it's a short book, because it's very academic and it's quite challenging. But it's absolutely fascinating, and you wouldn't think there was so much to learn about Afro hair and the discrimination, the cultural heritage of it, the way people react to it, even if they think they're being kind or complimentary. And it touches on a lot of my experiences as a child, having mixed race curly hair. I really empathise with a lot of what is described in the book, but I also learn a lot about the history of some of my ancestors, and some really interesting things, like the reason braids are so popular in black hair was because originally in slave times, women would hide grains of rice in their braids so that they could feed themselves if they were being starved, or if they were abandoned, or if they managed to escape. There are really, really interesting facts behind what we potentially have just seen as fashion before.
So those are 3 books that people need to get reading, and I'm sure there are tens and tens of thousands more that you'll be recommending. So if people want to find out more about you or about the books, where can they find you? What handles have you got in various places?
So if anybody would like to find me, my blog is that'sabitracy.com. On Instagram, I'm _bit _racy. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Claire Bale, on Twitter, Bale_Claire. And hopefully you can find me in various magazines around Nottingham as well. So I write for Left Lion magazine occasionally. I'm on the panel of the UNESCO City of Literature. And hopefully you'll just see me around and about, kind of trying to get people talking about race and ethnicity around Nottingham.
And a question that I like to finish up with on this podcast, and I think it's a perfect question for you, not only because you're a very interesting woman in Nottingham, but because you're in a girls' school and you're coming across women every single day. And the question is, what do you think the most remarkable thing about being a woman is?
That is a very good question, and I do reflect on this a lot. I think with women, there is a real strength in the way that we collaborate with each other. So we know that girls, and obviously I'm stereotyping to a certain extent here, but generally, girls learn best through collaboration, through discussion, sharing ideas, building on ideas. And I've seen that at Nottingham Girls High School, but that really, really extends, and I've felt that hugely in the work I've been doing. So I honestly wouldn't have had the resilience or the perseverance or the confidence to do what I'm doing without the backup of the people I've met along the way. The women who have proofread for me, invited me to speak, and as part of that collaboration, women are also really comfortable with asking for help and for support and other voices, and I think that's absolutely great. I think that's how we get improvement and self-confidence and share our knowledge, and by really, really working together quite altruistically, I think that's an incredible skill and asset that a lot of women own.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
That's a pleasure. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Have you got any closing thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with people?
I guess my closing thought would just be to keep talking. We've all seen a huge burst of discourse on the subject of race over the summer with George Floyd's murder. I think it's really, really important we make sure that's not a flash in the pan. We're starting to get into some really, really fascinating and world-changing opportunities and conversations now. I just think it's hugely important that we keep going.
And that was my conversation with Claire Bale. Definitely going to go and order some books straight after that conversation. Tune in next week for another wonderful woman of Nottingham.